so we lost. But at least I went out like a Chad. So today we're going to explain that in round 9, an analysis.
Yes, if my terrible acting and work in progress cosplay, cough cough visit the second channel, didn't make it clear, round 9 has come to an end, and with it another spear user has fallen and the Greek pantheon has escaped the L allegations. However, for as badass as moments of this fight were and how goddamn raw that final chapter was, what you probably all came here for is my opinion on the themes and messages found within this fight, and so today that is what I'm going to try figure out. So if you find yourself entertained, then perhaps like, subscribe and ring that bell. Anyway, let's get on with discussing round 9 of Ragnarok, a round I am dubbing Beauty vs Sparta. Now, in some rounds of Ragnarok, the two combatants foil each other in that they are very similar but differing in one key way. For example, round 7's Hades and Qin Shi Huang, both embodying kingship, the big difference being that Hades was chained by his responsibility, unable to chase after his own goals, whereas Qin Shi Huang also pursues his own desires personified by his sword, which he uses to end the match. However, in other rounds, the two combatants are blatant opposites, and this is the category I feel round 9 falls into, with Apollo the pacifist pretty boy going up against Leonidas the battle-loving man's man, or at least that's how it appears on the surface. Now of course there is obviously more nuance to each of their individual characterization than what I just described, but on the surface level they are complete opposites. Now the introduction of Apollo is quite interesting. Before we even see him, we get Zeus and Ares describing him as a narcissist and a pretty boy. This being hammered home when we first see him with a woman on each side bathing under a statue of himself. He doesn't seem at all interested in fighting in Ragnarok until he learns that his fellow Greek gods had died. He says it's a shame that he couldn't see their deaths, as to him giving your all to something, even if it ends in death, is supremely beautiful. So he chose to fight in order to show his own beauty, as by his own words, one shines brightest in battle, and the god of the sun must act when motivated by such beautiful cheers. Now let's contrast this to Leonidas' introduction in the same chapter. He too is introduced lounging around, however instead of being surrounded by women who adore him, he is surrounded by men who respect him, men who even in death continue to train, likely due to his influence. Expectations, you see, are a massive part of this fight. Leonidas, like Apollo at first, has no desire to fight. With an arrogance on par with Apollo, he states he'll either fight first or last, only agreeing to enter the arena once hearing his opponent will be Apollo, a god he appears to have some personal beef with. We also get the reveal of his epithet, human history's greatest rebel, someone who opposed the voices of the gods. Also funny to note how he refused to fight when first asked. Quite the rebel indeed. The key point to remember here being that Apollo fought due to the expectations of others, whereas Leonidas fought for his own personal agenda. With Leonidas' entrance we get a lot of the Spartan hype, how the men of Sparta never give up, never surrender, that they never bow their heads nor take a knee to no one. Leonidas, the mightiest king of the mightiest people, stands as the pinnacle of what a true Spartan warrior should be. He leads by example. As he enters the ring, he throws aside his Spartan helmet, not as some statement on him disregarding his heritage, but instead it's a statement on how he has moved past it. He throws off his cape to show him wearing modern tactical gear, because the Spartans never give up, and so he has, even after death, continued to train in the ways of war, hence why his attire is that of a modern day soldier, because Spartans don't fall behind with the times, they keep moving forward, keep getting stronger. Honestly, Leonidas has possibly my favourite design in the entire story, just because of how much it says about him as a character. God do I love it. And in contrast as always, Apollo enters in the most elaborate and impractical of attires. He after all values beauty over function, and so his outfit follows suit. He is also flanked by women because he is only fighting here because of their expectations. Them entering the ring with him is to emphasise that he is here because of them. What is emphasised in Apollo's introduction is his beauty and strength, aka the superficial things on his surface. No praise given to the efforts he made to get there. It's funny because Leonidas was praised for never giving up, aka his efforts, whereas Apollo was praised for his strength, aka his natural ability, even though as we later find out, it's kind of the opposite way around. The fight begins with what is first assumed to be a false start, Leonidas attacking the moment the fight begins. After all, he has no care for superficial beauty or etiquette, he is here to win and so he attacks. Something that seems to disgust Apollo, who sees it as discourteous and arrogant. Apollo, after all, on the surface appears to embody the same godly superiority as Poseidon, something which, as we later see, may not be his true nature, but instead the attitude forced on him due to the expectations of others. Because as we learn, Apollo wasn't originally the god of the sun, of archery, of boxing, of anything. He wasn't born one of the 12 Olympians, he earned that title. Unlike in myth, he is not the son of Zeus. Instead, he was a lowly god who earned the right to stand at the top. He wasn't born superior to others in the same way as Poseidon. He didn't have this predetermined sense of ego. Instead, he earned the right through effort. Or another way to look at it is that as he gained power as a god, he also gained the expectations that came with said power. People treated him like one of the 12 gods of Olympus, so he had no choice but to act to meet those expectations. It might be why Apollo is so arrogant at the start of the match, but shows more and more compassion, aka his true self, as the match goes on, because as he said himself, one is most beautiful when fighting, and also one is most beautiful when being themselves. As he fights, he reveals more and more of who he truly is, hence why his arrogance, the fake facade caked onto him by centuries of expectations, slowly fades away. The other gods insulted him when he fell to his knees and betrayed their expectations of a god, but that is because they don't understand the true Apollo. What he does is not in line with what they expected of the sun god, so they shun such behaviour. Whereas the people that understand him, like his fellow Greek gods, see this as his true power, and his opponent Leonidas, who came to understand the true beauty of Apollo through their fight, comes to acknowledge this strength as well. Apollo, though, despite having worked hard for his position, is not just right because of it. When he speaks of pacifism, he thinks only as a god. He did genuinely think the peace days he gifted were just that, a precious gift. He thought that the humans would appreciate the gesture, but failed to understand that this could leave the humans unable to defend themselves if outsiders attacked. He lived through ideals, some that may not be realistic, which of course is fine for a god, but not for humanity. The fact Leonidas hates Apollo so much for what Apollo thought was just a throwaway gift speaks volumes of how little Apollo understood when it came to humanity. What seems like a small thing to him, to the humans, was a war that led 300 Spartans to fight 300,000 Persians. Another thing to note about Apollo's arrogance is that he believes in effort, that you must work to be recognised. This perhaps is why he had such a low opinion of Leonidas to begin with, because Leonidas had done nothing in his eyes to make him worthy. He sneak attacked and used a cheap shot in what in Apollo's eyes should have been a fair fight. How Leonidas fights does not conform to what Apollo viewed as beautiful, and so he did not earn respect in Apollo's eyes, and so because of that he deserved to be talked down to, because in Apollo's mind Leonidas had done nothing to make him worthy of standing on his level. Basically, his philosophy is that beauty is something anyone can achieve if they try hard enough, so those who aren't beautiful are just those who never tried. Basically, there's no excuse for not being beautiful, and so those too lazy to make the effort deserve to be viewed as lower than him, someone who put the effort in to become beautiful. Apollo, as far as the gods go, is a good guy. He believes anyone can be better and respects anyone who tries no matter how they look, but at the same time he still embodies the arrogance of the gods, an arrogance developed from that same growth. On a larger scale, this plays into how the gods aren't inherently superior, since Apollo had to work for his power, and that they are just the same as the humans. But for Apollo specifically, it shows that his personal philosophy is a double-edged sword, a duality of both self-love and arrogance simultaneously, and the fact he was unable to differentiate between the two is perhaps his largest flaw. But okay, enough about Apollo for now, let's get down to Leonidas. Leonidas was the king of Sparta, well technically one of two at the time, but let's not get all history nerd on it. He understood battle as a Spartan should, and so knew when to fight. He became a symbol of power to his men, earning him the greatest back in human history. They admired his back because that's all they saw of him. Leonidas, after all, was always leading the charge, standing with his back to them as he charged the enemy. As Leonidas says, he is not one who enjoys fighting. He doesn't want to die, and he'd rather just sit back and have a nap with a glass of wine. But there is a time to fight, and when that time comes, you must fight for your own will. This is the attitude he had when he fought the Persians. He disobeyed Apollo because he knew it was the time to fight. And this is the same as when we saw him in the present day, deciding round 9 was the right time to fight again because of his own will. Leonidas fought for his own will because fighting for your own will, well, that is Sparta. If Apollo saw beauty in doing things for your own betterment, then Leonidas saw Sparta as doing things for your own will. As Leonidas goes off alone to face the invaders, he finds himself joined by his men. They were inspired by him, by a true warrior, Scared as they were, they still chose to fight because that is what they believed was the right thing to do. That it was the time not for peace, but to fight. Fighting, after all, is inherently ugly, there is beauty in it. Apollo, though, only perceived beauty in battle through fighting fair. It's why he put himself at a disadvantage to fight Leonidas at close quarters. However, that is only how Apollo saw it. To the Spartans, their way of fighting was just as beautiful. As Hagar said, only when they were charging in, heavily outnumbered, did he feel for the first time alive. In the end, they all died, but through their deaths they accomplished something great. Their sacrifice rallied all of Greece and led to the Persians being pushed back. Even if it was leading to death, it was the right time to fight. And such a cool detail is that Leonidas only got all his scars during that final battle, meaning that his peak as a human, the form he manifested in Valhalla, was him during that final battle. That was when he was truly alive in the midst of battle for the greater good of his country. Truly the mightiest king of the mightiest people. Leonidas, as someone who truly understood battle not for pleasure but as something that must be done, is of course a complete contrast to Apollo and the myth of pacifism he bestowed to the Spartans. Now, something I think people often misunderstand is the reason for Leonidas' anger. Something I too was guilty of before sitting down to write this script. The elders of Sparta always talked about how breaking the oracle will incur divine punishment. That Apollo specifically would never forgive them no matter their reasons, that he, the god, was without question correct. He was led to believe that if the Spartans broke said divine orders, they would be dealt divine punishment. This is what he wanted revenge for. Leonidas hated Apollo not just because his actions led to Sparta being unable to properly defend itself, leading to his and his men's death, but more importantly because he viewed Apollo as an arrogant god who would rather be worshipped than let a country defend itself from invaders. It's not I hate Apollo because he led to my death, it's I hate Apollo because his carelessness and arrogance, his godly superiority, led to my death. Leonidas had never met Apollo. As he says, why should he trust a god who he has never seen? Apollo the god didn't have time to visit the humans. The fact Leonidas only had the words of the oracle made his hatred burn even hotter because it cemented his views of Apollo as an arrogant god. And so when the round starts and Apollo starts speaking of divine punishment, this only further solidified Leonidas' impression of Apollo. As the match goes on, Leonidas starts to understand the true Apollo more and more, and his hate begins to lessen, but of course it's not like centuries of resentment can just vanish in a handful of minutes. Leonidas, in short, hated the image of Apollo he created in his head, a nice play on the theme of expectations present across the round. Which, you know what, let's get into that theme right now. Both of these fighters have expectations placed upon them, is why the respective sides of the arena feature statues of the sun god and of the ideal Spartan, because they are viewed as ideals, as monuments, not just as people. Leonidas of course is adored by his men, seen as a paragon of a warrior, his back is worshipped, and Apollo is also adored by his fellow gods. This is best seen in chapter 80, the crowds on both sides give an onslaught of comments, the Spartans tell Apollo to fight fairly, the gods tell them to show him the power of the gods. This panel here shows Apollo dwarfed by these comments, by the expectations of him, those he chooses to meet. By engaging Leonidas in close quarters, he works to prove his superiority to him in a situation where he would clearly excel. As he says, he'll definitely meet everyone's expectations, for that is the duty of a supreme being like himself, of the great sun god Lord Apollo. As a great god he feels he has to meet the expectations others have for him to prove that he is beautiful. Leonidas though, even though this gives him the advantage, is disgusted. Something which if you notice is in contrast to his men's words, because they only worship him, they don't understand him, exactly the same as the crowds onslaughting Apollo with words. Leonidas doesn't care about fair fights, but he hates being looked down upon, once again because of his views of Apollo and the anger he feels towards a god's arrogance, a being he believes to have just been born self-entitled. Another thing to notice is how once they start this close combat melee, the opinions of the crowd swap. The Spartans now annoyed, he went to close combat and the gods now praise him for the decision. This just goes to show how expectations can change on the dime and that you need to just be true to yourself. Something Leonidas definitely is, but Apollo, despite his preaching of beauty, has somewhat forgotten. Now if you reread the fight, most of the dialogue between these two is just fancy ways of saying, "Kneel to me." which I think is quite fitting considering what the two are respectively fighting for. Apollo is fighting to prove he is superior and so wants Leonidas to kneel before him, the superior god. And Leonidas is fighting to prove he and humanity as a whole are not inferior to some arrogant god, and so wants Apollo to kneel before him to show he is not some superior being. Yet Apollo's pride as a god and Leonidas' pride as a Spartan prevent this, all until Leonidas succeeds and makes the god kneel before him. Yet this is when something truly eye-opening happens. Despite having been made to kneel and despite now sporting a nasty gash on his beautiful face, Apollo says this is him at his most beautiful. It is in this moment both us the reader and Leonidas come to realise the truth of Apollo, that he is more than arrogance. Leonidas calls him beaten into the ground, ungraceful, but Apollo refutes this because as long as he is still trying to win, then he is beautiful. The gods who only cared about him meeting their expectations insult him for this. They care not for the true Apollo who is on his knees with a bloodied face, because that isn't the image of the sun god they had in their minds. The fact Apollo calls himself beautiful despite his physical disfigurement makes us all realise that the very beauty he speaks of is not so superficial. It wasn't his mere looks he called beautiful, it was his very being. Even Leonidas comes to understand this, and so it's at this moment his view of Apollo changes, with him saying he goddamn likes it. Only when Apollo is no longer meeting expectations and being himself is he truly at his strongest, and only then do we get his backstory, because only then has the facade been broken, symbolised by his cut face, and only then can we understand who he is beyond the ego born of expectations. In this backstory we learn of Apollo and Python, how he kept fighting Python day after day until one day Python admitted his loss, revealing his repulsion at his own appearance, to which Apollo replies that what's truly beautiful is him as he is now. It's his fighting spirit that is beautiful. He explains that those who keep moving forward are beautiful, and that those that just sit on their arses and are content with the present are not. That those who know what they lack and aren't afraid of change are those who truly know themselves and their own beauty. Which, funny enough, is a pretty accurate description of Leonidas. His attire and attitude to battle shows he is by no means rooted in the present, and he fought with a burning will to change the destiny set out by God. Leonidas is exactly the kind of guy Apollo would admire. Apollo just didn't realise it at first. You could even say this is a microcosm of humanity as a whole, with their constant march forward being their greatest strength. The final thing I want to touch on in Apollo's flashback though is how Apollo says a god's job is to stop everything before it turns to war. Once again emphasising his good intentions. He truly did mean his oracle to be one apiece, but what he failed to understand was that there can be beauty even in war. At the same time, Leonidas comes to accept his view of Apollo was wrong, and that he was more than just arrogance, and Apollo comes to admit that Leonidas' attack was beautiful. And as a testament to this, to show he too has overcome adversity and kept moving forwards, he on just instinct deflected Apollo's strongest attack. Him deflecting the arrow is physical evidence he meets Apollo's definition of beauty. Leonidas declares who he is with all his soul. He truly knows himself, and Apollo acknowledges this. Now, a trend over the last few rounds is the god and human combatants coming to admire each other, and this round is no different, with Apollo calling Leonidas a little more beautiful, and Leonidas calling Apollo a little more manly. Apollo poses Leonidas a question: is he fighting for revenge, or for humanity? And much like he said back in Greece, he declares that now is the time to fight, and we finally get the truth of Leonidas' philosophy spelled out to us, that we humans can't choose how or where we were born, but we can choose how we'll live and how we will die, and that's why he chooses to follow his own soul. And as he says this, his shield transforms into its final form, a simple old Spartan shield, no fancy blades or hammers. It's simple as can be, but that's just how a man fights, with all their soul. And so they clash, both putting their everything on the line. Apollo shatters Leonidas' shield, yet even so the king goes for a punch, and this is just my interpretation of course, but I think this moment is the first time a human touched the god in such a way. Sure, the blow did no damage, but the Spartan, pretty much dead already, with his valance shattered, landed a non-empowered hit, a normal human hit. At that moment, it was just Leonidas. No valance, no nothing, just him, his fist, and Apollo's face. The punch connected, and even if it did no damage, it brought joy to Leonidas. He said it himself after all. He no longer was fighting for revenge or for humanity. It was just for himself and his own selfish wish to sock that sun god Apollo right in the face. He may have lost, but he still accomplished something with his death. Even if it was just a personal victory, it mirrors his first death in a way. And so even as he is struck by Apollo, Leonidas stays standing. With his back to the people, he tells them that he hopes they are watching because he's glad to know that Sparta is the strongest. Not because they won, but because he managed to land a hit on a god with nothing but his own human power. He may have lived a selfish life, true to his own soul, but that is true strength to Leonidas, and so as he died and he fell to his knees, Apollo caught him, not letting this beautiful king's knees touch the ground. Because only those who aren't beautiful, those not worthy, are meant to be kneeling in Apollo's presence. Leonidas had proved himself to Apollo, and so he was not allowed to kneel in front of him, because he was not beneath Apollo. They were equals. And let both him and Guriel know they were the most beautiful people he'd ever seen. Because beauty comes from doing your best, moving forward, and most importantly, knowing yourself. As goddammit did Leonidas know himself. And thus concludes round 9 of Ragnarok. Beauty versus Sparta. Hope you enjoyed that, because I so enjoyed making it. Honestly, this round was amazing, probably ranking as like my 4th favourite in the series so far. And Leonidas and Apollo both easily make my top 10 characters, with Apollo being the only god combatant, minus Buddha I guess, to actually have that honour. Next chapter we should hopefully be starting round 10, and I'm excited to see it. So just to really date this video, I'm going to predict round 10 will be the round of death, Rasputin versus Anubis. And well, if I am wrong, then roast me in the comments. And if you want to support this channel even further, then perhaps pledge to my Patreon or become a channel member so you can get your name at the end of the video, like Hikari Desu, Rinjak9696, General Tonyos, Mr. Sputum and Matthias Rowett. So with all that said and done, I've been Seth the Sin, the Deadly Sin of Geek, and I'm signing out. Stay safe everyone.